This is NBC Nightly News, Tuesday, October 9th. Reported by John Chancellor. With David Brinkley's Journal.
Good evening. The war in the Middle East grew in intensity today, and as of tonight, no end of the fighting is in sight. The main news is that the Israeli Air Force bombed the Syrian capital of Damascus. Official reports put the number of civilian dead and wounded at about 100. Israeli jets also struck at targets in the Cairo area. Military airfields north and east of the city were hit by bombs. And at the United Nations tonight, the Egyptians say Cairo itself was hit in air raids. In the Sinai Desert, battles are still raging between an armada of Egyptian tanks and Israeli armored units. The Israelis have abandoned most of their elaborate first line of defense, the Bar-Lev line. In the Golan Heights, along the Syrian ceasefire line, the Israelis say they have contained the enemy drive. And the war was carried to Lebanon, where the Israelis knocked out a radar station. The Israeli raid on Damascus came in the middle of the day. The Defense Ministry and the radio and television station were hit, along with the Russian Cultural Center and a number of foreign diplomatic buildings. Civilian casualties were high. Here is a description of the raid from BBC correspondent Philip Short.
Standing in the streets, another thump in the distance just then. There's a great column of smoke going up about 200 or 300 feet high. People seem to be waiting to see whether the planes are going to go over again.
In the United Nations Security Council tonight, the Soviet ambassador, Yakov Malik, denounced the Israeli bombing of Damascus as, he put it, a barbaric gangster act. After Malik finished speaking, the Israeli delegate, Joseph Tekoa, rose to offer his country's condolences to the Russians and others for the bombing. As he did so, Malik led the entire Soviet delegation out of the Security Council chamber. Malik's speech preceding the walkout was bitter in the extreme. He talked of the Israelis' bloody act and compared the bombing to the behavior of Adolf Hitler. And he added that the peaceful forces of the entire world condemn the aggressive policy of Israel. There was another accusation against Israel. Egyptian Foreign Minister Mohammed El-Zayat told the council that Cairo had been bombed by Israeli planes. Until then, Egypt had said only that Israeli planes had bombed 2 Egyptian military airfields. The war was carried to Lebanon today by the Israelis, who used jet planes to knock out the biggest radar station in the Middle East with scanners which can monitor all of Israel's airspace. It is also reported that a few Israeli half-tracks have crossed into Lebanon from Israel. We'll have a report tonight from the Golan Heights on the fighting there. Our correspondent, John Dancy, is with Israeli troops in the Sinai Desert, and we'll be hearing from him. There was more reaction to the war at the White House, and we'll hear what the president had to say.
These are 2 great performance cars. This one has a top speed of over 120 and will do the quarter mile in 18.4 seconds. This one with its rotary engine also does 120. And in a quarter mile race, wins. And for the price of this Mercedes-Benz 450 SLC, you can have this Mazda, and this Mazda, and this Mazda. The thrill is back, Mazda reborn.
If you've tried dandruff shampoos and are still bothered with itching and flaking, listen how others help control their problem with regular use of Selsun Blue.
Selsun Blue is the answer to a prayer, and I only wish that it had been developed 30 years sooner. I want to say thank you for changing my way of life.
Selsun Blue, the only non-prescription shampoo that contains the anti-dandruff ingredient most widely prescribed by doctors. Selsun Blue.
In addition to the raid on Damascus, the Israeli Air Force today hit oil refineries and power plants near the Syrian city of Homs. The Israelis say they now have formed a line of stability on the Golan Heights, but they point out that the Syrians are neither broken nor routed. It is the Israeli plan to increase pressure on the Syrians in the heights. Here's a report on that situation from our correspondent, Don North.
heavy Israeli armor heading for the front. Newly manufactured tanks mounted on trucks moved briskly forward. Closer to the front, they moved ahead on their own. Tracked armored cars, personnel carriers, and trucks loaded with ammunition. The main fighting was near Quneitra, an Israeli town near the Syrian border. This is the Benatnikov Bridge, a key crossing on the road to Damascus. It's now a priority target for Syrian artillery, desperately trying to halt the advance of massive armor and troop reinforcements going to the front. A tank battle was reported raging near Quneitra, about 3 kilometers from this point. Syrian artillery rounds were landing thick and fast the closer reinforcements moved toward Quneitra. Troops here were calling it a new Syrian offensive. Few points along the road were safe from Syrian artillery, and troops were ordered to disperse and keep moving. When orders came from the front, the fresh troops went forward toward Quneitra. Syrian commandos were reported to have attempted a landing in this area, assaulting in 4 helicopters. Troops here said the Syrian helicopters were shot down. In spite of the strong Israeli offensive, Syrian artillery and rockets were still effective. The kibbutz of Chulata, miles behind these lines, was hit hard by Syrian rockets. Ambulances raced back constantly with dead and wounded. At a frontline aid station, the wounded were given emergency aid. There appeared to be wounded being brought out of the battle area, but no official word on casualties was available. Journalists and cameras were not welcome in the first aid area. In the air over the Golan Heights, the Israeli Air Force was everywhere. Phantoms, Skyhawks, and the Mirage, all heavily loaded with bombs or rockets, screaming in low over the hills toward the area of the tank battle. They were unopposed by the Syrian Air Force. Syrian artillery appears to be slowing but not stopping the advance of Israeli forces here in the Golan Heights. Israeli troops here say they have some respect for the accuracy of that Syrian artillery. Don North, NBC News, in the Golan Heights.
One of the advantages the Syrians have in this fighting is that they are using those Russian surface-to-surface missiles Don North mentioned, some with a range of 40 miles. Unless those missiles are knocked out, the Israelis will have trouble in that area. Here's a report now on the war as seen from the Syrian side.
Syrian television showed Syrian guns firing and some of the damage caused by the fierce fighting on the Golan Heights. The newscast made a proud point of displaying Israeli signs captured by Syrian forces in their early sweep into the Israeli-occupied territory. At that time, the Israelis were badly outnumbered by the Syrians. Syria's Soviet-made armor was shown moving in the heights, first taken by Israel in the June War of 1967. The armor looked powerful, but today Syria admitted that its forces were under heavy Israeli air attack. But the Syrians claimed their troops were still advancing. As evidence of what Syria calls its victory, Syrian TV again showed captured Israelis, apparently ground troops this time, instead of the airmen displayed earlier. George Montgomery, NBC News.
The Egyptian Navy lost 3 small ships to the Israeli Navy today in an action off the delta of the Nile River. Along the east bank of the Suez Canal, or a few miles from it, the fighting is described as bitter and bloody, and so far inconclusive. The Israelis have admitted abandoning the famous Bar Lev line, a series of elaborate blockhouses and bunkers along the banks of the canal. But Israeli reinforcements are pouring into the Sinai, and our correspondent John Dancy is with them. Here is his report.
The road to the Suez Canal is lined with vehicles waiting for orders to move up to the front. Along the road, there is no evidence that the Israelis are in retreat or that the Egyptians are advancing with anything like the speed they claim. Buses from the national bus line have been mobilized to move men to the front when the orders come. Today, men made final preparations for going into battle. The devout tied on phylacteries to symbolize their devotion and ask God's protection in the battle to come. This is a forward position just 3 miles from the village of Kantara, which is on the Suez Canal. From here, you can see and hear the battle going on in the distance. The Israelis say they've managed to contain the Egyptians inside 3 bridgeheads a few miles from the canal. The Egyptians claim to be making steady advances, but there is no sign of it here, nor is there any evidence that the Egyptians have air superiority. The only planes overhead today were Israeli. That is not to say that the fighting is not hard. The Israeli soldiers themselves admit being surprised by the strength and swiftness of the Egyptian attack. How's the war going?
It's not easy, but it's going on. It's okay, but tough. It's hard.
It's harder this time than...
Yeah, I was in 2 wars. This time it's much harder, if I tell the truth.
Why?
At this time, they were ready and we were not enough ready.
As fierce as the fighting here in the Sinai has been, it has been contained to uninhabited desert instead of taking place a few dozen miles from Tel Aviv. If the Israelis win this war, it is going to be harder than ever to convince them that they ought to give this buffer zone, the Sinai, back to Egypt. John Dancy, NBC News, in the Sinai Desert.
The Israelis today were making no claims of victory. One official was asked if this will be a long war. He replied, it won't be a short one. One briefing officer warned against what he called soaring visions of elegant and rapid conquest of the Arabs. There is no talk of victory in 6 days this time, although officials in Tel Aviv say, let us not think in terms of danger to the state of Israel. In Tel Aviv tonight, we've asked our Israeli correspondent, David Burrington, to talk a bit about the war. David, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, John. Go ahead.
David, were the Israelis really surprised by what happened when the Arabs attacked?
Apparently not. One senior official said tonight that they had known for at least a week that there probably would be an attack. But a political decision was made, one, not to strike back first, and secondly, to try to use political means to talk the 2 Arab countries out of making this attack. And there was an effort through third countries to let the 2 countries know that Israel knew a war was imminent and asked them not to go through with it. This failed. Go ahead.
I was just going to say the Israelis held up mobilization while that went on.
Yes, and this, too, according to this official, was done deliberately so as not to antagonize the 2 Arab countries or give them any reason for or justification for striking first.
Does part of the Israeli defense plan allow for a delayed mobilization?
No, and this mobilization has not been delayed once they really got it underway. Of course, they argue that they are always, to some degree, mobilized, and that is true. There are always reserve soldiers on duty. But the plan, first of all, has to be given a green light. In this case, it apparently did not get the green light until the day before the fighting began.
Okay, David, thank you, and good luck to you all in Tel Aviv. Saudi Arabia tonight called up its armed forces and canceled all army leaves. The Middle East news agency interrupted its regular programming to broadcast a call from the Saudi High Command asking that all military men on leave report to their units immediately. So, as we've seen, the war is still very much on, and there is, as of now, no end in sight. According to American analysts, the Arabs are fighting better than they did in 1967. Both the Egyptians and the Israelis have taken many, many casualties in the first few days of the fighting. In 1967, the conflict was called the Six-Day War. They are calling this one the Holy Day War, and it's likely to last more than 6 days.
Hang a curtain? Simple, except on those occasions when arthritis flares up with minor pain and its stiffness. For help, take Anacin. Anacin contains the pain reliever most recommended by doctors for arthritis. When even simple movement can cause pain, Anacin relieves minor pain and so its stiffness for hours, brings more freedom of movement without pain. For hours of relief from minor arthritis pain and its stiffness, for more freedom of movement without pain, take Anacin.
Recognize these? They turn water blue in bathroom bowls, but do nothing about germs that grow in bowls. Now introducing new SanaFlush, the only in-tank cleaner that inhibits germ growth. Read the labels on other in-tank cleaners. Nowhere will they say they do anything against germs. Only SanaFlush has a germostat that's active against even staph germs. New Blue SanaFlush, the only in-tank cleaner that inhibits germ growth.
I've got a secret in my refrigerator. It's there, way in back. See? An open box of Arm & Hammer baking soda. It actually absorbs food odors. Whether you have cheese, onions, broccoli, even fish, it'll keep your refrigerator sweeter, cleaner, and fresher smelling. At the end of 2 months, put in a new box and pour the old box down a drain to help make it clean smelling. Arm & Hammer baking soda. A nice little secret for your refrigerator.
I work harder keeping fit than most people, but all of us need exercise, and we all need to eat sensibly. That's why I like grapefruit juice. It's really helpful when you're trying to stay in shape. Pure, refreshing, and delicious. 6 ounces gives me all the natural vitamin C I need for a day, yet only 75 calories. No wonder many sound diet programs recommend grapefruit juice from Florida. There's nothing like it if you want to stay in shape.
In Washington, diplomatic sources said today that the United States has received indications from the Soviet Union that the Russians will take steps to keep the fighting from spreading beyond the Middle East. In the meantime, Secretary of State Kissinger and his advisors continued to look for a solution, and President Nixon himself again took public notice of the crisis while welcoming an African visitor to the White House, President Félix Houphouët-Boigny of the Ivory Coast. Tom Brokaw has the story.
In a speech welcoming the president of the Ivory Coast to this country today, President Nixon again talked about his hopes of ending the current fighting in such a way that war in the Middle East would not break out again.
We will today be talking about how we can contribute to an end to the fighting, which is now going on at such terrible cost to both sides in the Mideast. How all nations can contribute to the goal of not simply an end to the fighting which is going on now, but to building a new structure of peace in the Mideast, which will give a better hope for avoiding war breaking out, as it has over and over again for the past 25 years.
As he has all this week, President Nixon met with Secretary of State Kissinger several times today. No details of their discussions were released. However, the public emphasis continues to be on finding a solution that will lead to what the president calls a permanent structure of peace in the Middle East. So far, at least, there is nothing to indicate what progress the president has been able to make toward that goal. We may know more tomorrow morning. Mr. Nixon has invited congressional leaders of both parties to a 9 o'clock meeting here at the White House. Tom Brokaw, NBC News, Washington.
As the Arab-Israeli war grows more intense, so do the activities of sympathizers on both sides in the United States. The Arab Information Center said today it has received offers of medical and other assistance for Egypt and Syria. But the Jews in the United States far outnumber the Arabs. The Israeli government told them today that the war has cost Israel $850 million in its first 4 days. And American Jews have been raising money so fast, they say they've fallen behind in counting it. They're also doing more than just raising money, as we learn in this report from Robert Hager.
Effort by a variety of Jewish organizations to raise money and collect blood, and even process volunteers willing to go to Israel. An organization called Sharut Laham has been asked by Israel to send more than 100 able-bodied volunteers from America by this weekend. But the volunteers won't be permitted to join the fighting. Instead, they'll be asked to take jobs on farms and other positions left vacant by those who are fighting. Others have been waiting to give blood for wounded Israeli soldiers. The New York City Blood Bank announced it would accept donations to pass on to the Israeli counterpart of the American Red Cross. But the most successful appeal has been for money. There have been dozens of rallies like this one last night in suburban Great Neck, Long Island. The wife of the Israeli UN ambassador announced the goal set by Israel.
The minimum of $100 million is expected of the Jewish community in the United States of America.
Moments later, the money began to pour in.
Maybe we get them started. Okay, Mark Schiff. I've already paid my 73 pledge. I'd like to increase it for the emergency fund, $500.
I am going back to the board of directors tomorrow, which I will call a special meeting. And I hope we will fulfill that $1 million if possible to send it immediately. As paid as pledged.
This rally alone collected $2 million. Nationwide, it's obvious the final figure will go way over the goal.
Thank you very much.
Robert Hager, NBC News, New York.
I have a check here.
Kuwait called today for a meeting of the Arab oil countries to take another look at their oil policies because of the new war in the Middle East. During the 1967 war, Kuwait and some other Arab nations cut off oil shipments to the United States and Britain in retaliation for their support of Israel. In Washington today, White House Energy Advisor John Love said a cutoff now would probably lead to a heating oil shortage this winter. David Brinkley's Journal tonight is about oil, the countries that have it, and the countries that want it. David?
Whatever happens in the current fighting, there will be the Middle Eastern states sitting there on the world's biggest pools of oil saying who gets how much and at what price. And the industrial countries will be in poor position to argue. The world does change. In the 19th century, the British seized a huge empire to get raw materials for their industry. Energy they didn't need since they burned their own coal and oil for cars they didn't need yet. Conquest and empire were still fashionable then, and in these respects, history was on their side. In these same respects today, history is not on the American side. The 19th century British and others in a similar bind would simply have sent armies to the Middle East and taken the oil. But that kind of conquest and empire are no longer fashionable or acceptable. No one does it these days but the Russians, who have an empire in Central Europe. So the Middle Eastern oil states, protected by these changes in Western history and opinion, can sit on their oil and take advantage of the seller's market. In an earlier time, they couldn't have. In Washington today, President Nixon approved a publicity campaign using a comic strip character named Snoopy to encourage Americans to save energy by turning down thermostats, adding insulation, and turning off the lights. So in about 3 generations, the West has gone from sending armies to seize foreign property to using a dog named Snoopy to save it.
You see this chainsaw? It's the 9995 Minimac 1. McCulloch made it for just one job. My yard. It only weighs 6.9 pounds. Believe me, that counts out here. It'll even cut a 20-inch log. You got anything bigger than that? Look, only McCulloch makes a saw this light for so little money. When you can get a McCulloch for $99.95, why pay more?
Pepto-Bismol presents Famous Last Brags.
They don't make no mustard too hot for me. I got a cast iron stomach.
Me? Get diarrhea? Never.
Pile it on, Ma. I could eat a horse. I had 4 hot pepper heroes and a cupcake on a 5-minute coffee break.
Upset stomach? Pepto-Bismol coats and soothes. Comes between the upset and the stomach.
Oh, that's better. It must have been the cupcake.
Some members of the Senate Watergate Committee said today that they would like to hear testimony from Howard Hughes and from President Nixon's friend, Baby Rebozo. The committee is looking into a report that Hughes gave Rebozo $100,000 in cash at about the same time the Nixon administration made 2 rulings favorable to Hughes. The Supreme Court today refused to reconsider its ruling last June on obscenity or its rejection of a school desegregation plan in Virginia. The court also turned down an attempt by the state of Georgia to get a quick ruling on the constitutionality of presidential impoundment of funds. The justices also refused to review the conviction of former Teamster President James Hoffa on charges of tampering with a jury. In baseball, Cincinnati beat the Mets 2-1 in 12 innings, and in the American League playoffs, Oakland beat Baltimore 2-1. Finally tonight, a rare event. We have the story of an intelligent, active, talented man in the prime of life leaving one of the most prestigious jobs in the world. United States Senator William Saxby, Republican of Ohio, just elected in 1968, will not run again. Here's the story from Paul Duke.
In 4 short years, freshman Bill Saxby has become the foremost maverick of the Senate. He has gone his own way, said what he wanted, and voted as he pleased. Now he's giving it all up to go back to an Ohio farm because he finds it too hard to get anything done.
Well, I don't think that the people down here give the American people enough credit for discerning baloney. And I just think that they could handle a lot more direct talk, and they could still get elected. I despair because maybe we spend too much time in getting reelected down here. I estimate about 60% of a congressman or senator's time is maintaining his hold and just hanging on. And if they're only getting 40% of their effort, that's not enough. I observe fewer and fewer come down here with the resolve to change it. Most of them want to join it. And the pressures are very persuasive to join it. And this is something that you have to resist because it's comfortable and friendly and attractive just to go along and to wait until you get on top of the heap and then hit a lick. To do this, why, you've got to start in when you're in your 30s, and you've got to tough it out for a few years, and by the time you're ready to kick the bucket, why, you've got a lot of clout. And it's a game that I'm too old to play.
Good night for NBC News.
Keeping kids clean isn't easy. But now, Frigidaire is having a Cleanup Days special on one-piece skinny mini washers and dryers and our large 18-pound twins. You can get a refund of up to $20. See your Frigidaire dealer now for details on our Cleanup Days special. He has an easy way to keep the kids clean.
I always gave the furniture I built rubbed-in Paste Wax Beauty, but now I get Paste Wax Beauty instantly with New Pledge. This table was rubbed with Paste Wax for 12 minutes and a lot of muscle. Now I'll dust this one with New Pledge. You know, Pledge now has an enriched formula containing key ingredients found in Johnson Paste Wax. To me, it's a dead ringer for the Paste Wax shine. So, for the rubbed-in beauty of Paste Wax instantly, dust with New Pledge.
Hey, man, I didn't do anything.
How can you say that, Stanley? Here's your picture running out of the bank.
Marjo, Dawn Meredith, and Tony LaBianco star in Police Story. Police action as it really happens. Tonight at 10, 9 Central Time on NBC.
This is Channel 4, WSMTV in Nashville.
All right, man. Take a break. How long have we been out here anyway, eh?
Who knows? Oh, Yank, what about some of that Stroh's beer, what you've been talking about? Oh, marvellous.
From one beer lover to another.
Here, save some of that for the rest of us, Alfie. Here.